CSPi has been working on a lot of data systems for a little over a year now. Just a little background, my slides won't cover this. We provide several security-oriented products for cybersecurity. The one I'm going to talk about today is enhanced network security, but we have a suite of applications that are underneath our Aria platform. We'll talk a little bit about the platform, but today's session is going to be focused on network security. So, as Christy said, please bring in questions as you have them through the chat. We also have a few questions that have been asked in advance, and we'll make sure we cover those as well. All right. So with that, I'll kick off by setting the stage a little bit with, why do we need yet another security solution, another tool? And the point really is that how have we been doing with data breaches? And year over year, I ask the same question, and it's always a new record in breaches. It's always a new cast of characters that are coming up. I left Equifax on here for my last presentation of 6 months ago, and I've added Marriott, Facebook, Google. I could probably put every major retailer on this list because the breaches just keep coming. Most of the major healthcare providers, and they're setting year-over-year records. So the records, not only the number of breaches, but the number of PII or PHI records breached is also exceeded 1 billion this year for the first time on a worldwide basis. So that's quite large. So the other thing that's happening and that's alarming a lot of the, I would say the mid-range audience out there is that the trend is not just the big guys. It's a lot of the threat actors are realizing it's a lot easier to go after the mid-size enterprises that have highly valuable data, but they just don't have the same level of SOC teams or expertise in-house to run a lot of sophisticated solutions. So they're the easy, low-hanging fruit. So they don't get the name recognition or the press, but the vast majority of these breaches, by 95%, are all people who are in the Fortune 1000 to Fortune 10,000 range. And it's not so much the Fortune 50 anymore because they do enough usually to protect themselves, other than this cast of characters who didn't take things too seriously. The other point I'll make out is that FTC has been given more authority to go in and go after organizations who have been found of doing breaches. Little unknown is, they went after Target, and Target literally had to pay out vast sums of money because they were liable for the credit cards that were breached, not the banks. That was the first change in this law, the way it's being interpreted and enforced by the FTC. So that's changed a lot, especially for the retailers, because now they can be reliable, not the actual credit card holding banks. So there's a lot of pressure on, and it's coming from other outside forces like GDPR in Europe. HIPAA is being more rigorously enforced. It wasn't for several years. PCI, because of the hits there, is being heavily enforced. So lots more fines coming from the industry and scrutiny coming in from the vertical organizations and the rules that govern them. So lots going on. The point is, all these breaches are organizations just incompetent? What's going on here? And the problem really is that it's the existing set of tools are difficult to use. The other thing that's going on is that, the PII, PHI is a good example. The costs per record has gone up. So these are the actual costs to deal with a lost record by different verticals. So if you see yourselves here, this is what you can be faced with. I'd like to point out if you lose 1,000 records in healthcare, which could happen, off a single little small healthcare clinic easily, they could be faced with $400,000 of potential data loss charges. most of them aren't that small. They have a lot more patients than that. If you lose, 10,000, you're up to upwards of, $4 million in cost. So these things have huge impact because those organizations tend to not be able to handle that and can go out of business. So it has huge impact, this level of data loss. So we've got to do a better job, but we've got to make it actually easier or make it the tools that you already have work a lot better. And that's what we focused on. Let's make sure the tools you have work better. We'll provide you the tools if you don't have them and make sure they're very cost effective. But if you do have tools, let's just make them work better. We don't want to have you just throw out what you have and start using something new. So that's been our focus. And here's really one of the problems. This came out of Cisco. They provide a lot of tools out there, and they said, the root of the problem is there's two problems. There's too much noise data that doesn't matter, and there's not enough useful data that can be correlated in with the existing data. That sounds a little confusing, but what they're saying is you need to have more information that's relevant in order to figure out what the threats are and then figure out what to go and do about them. So it's all about more relevant information. And they just show the average enterprise, and this enterprise is only, a typical, like I would say, Fortune 5,000 size enterprise, somebody with maybe 10 million in revenues, maybe, 100 people. If they have a system, they can, in those types of environments, still see 5,000 events coming in a day off of their various systems, their endpoints, their firewalls, and it creates a lot of data that they have to go sift through, and often it is pretty incomplete because you can't see exactly what's going on. And that's the root of the problem. And if you can't tell exactly what's going on and you have too much information that's useless, you tend not to do anything or you focus on the wrong thing. And that's why these breaches are going on for so long. So it's not about just giving you more data, it's giving you more relevant data and then having the tools that actually help you to correlate the information together and say, yeah, this is what's going on. These are the threats that matter that you need to go focus on. And I'll show you an example of that. So where's the problem really coming from? In most cases, and I show a large example here, but in most cases, we've got firewalls that are protecting traffic that's going in and from the internet. And next generation firewalls have a pretty good set of rules that run against that, and they can do malware detection and things there. So they do okay, and then most people have got at least antivirus on endpoints, and a lot of them are moving to endpoint detection remediation systems, and they do okay, but it's usually when the EDR kicks in, that's when the threats are already spread throughout your environment and starting to land on devices, and either they're picking it up after the fact or they're trying to stop it as it appears. What would be better is if you could do what the firewall does and actually make sure you can see what's going on in your east-west network. That's your VPN network. That's the stuff going on inside your buildings, your offices, or between your branches and your various sites. Or if people are doing development like we sometimes do out in the cloud, you're actually extending your VPN all the way into like Amazon or Google or Azure, and that's just basically typically an unmonitored path. So it'd be good to be able to have visibility into that east-west network where probably 80% of the valuable data is going back and forth, and keeping an eye on that, and then utilizing that information to help you do a better job. I'll get into how we can do that. So that's really the blind spot of most organizations, and it's often where these critical devices are communicating. It's where your critical data stores are. It's usually where your PII, PHI, your information, your customer information, your financials, trade secrets, all that may be residing in here. But if you pull that apart and say, well, gee, that's an awfully big surface to try to cover. So that's always a challenge as well. So there needs to be a simple way to actually go in and get visibility into that surface. And we'll show you some examples of how to do that here in a minute. Okay, so we talk about the problem, so what's a solution to this? We are suggesting that you want to have some form of ability through software, and or software, augmented by a piece of hardware that will actually allow you to go in and tap into the network and pull up relevant information as to what's transpiring there. So lots of tools out there exist on the detection side that actually could take in raw network data if we fed them. I like to use Splunk and some of the SIMs as examples of this. They will gladly take in raw packet feeds if you want to send them. And then they can look through this and look for threats. So can IDS systems, so can IPS systems. In those cases, they're saying, send us the raw data, we'll look through it, and we'll find the threats. We can actually go inside the data and look for things like data leaks. We can run rules there and say, yep, here's somebody transferring credit card information, or here's somebody sending out a list of clients, and it's got identifiable information, maybe it has social security number information. We can actually find that because it fits a certain pattern inside the data, but you need actually access to the data. But that's really hard, because if you try to suck in, our environment here in Lowell, Massachusetts, where we're at, we've got a 10 gig backbone, and we're only running it maybe at 3 to 4 or 5 gigabits per second, but that's an awful lot of data. And if I try to feed that into, let's say a SIM, I'd probably be, looking at a $500,000 bill from someone like Splunk on a yearly basis. So that's just not practical. So there's got to be a better way. The nice thing is there is a better way, because these devices not only just take packet information, they're actually able to go in and take in what we call metadata. It's typically flow metadata. So our Aria solution does just that. It allows us to go onto the wire and collect up packet information, as well as generate flow information for every packet that transpires over the wire. So you can think of flow information as being, it's kind of like the outside of an envelope, and you've got a lot of data inside, but it's just telling you where it's to, where it's from, a little bit about what's going on inside the envelope, but not a lot of detail. So Aria allows us to go and do that, but we can also go a little bit further. We can also, that's allowing you to see, what people often talk about is the 5-tuple, the data, the source destinations, the ports that are being used, in some cases the protocols that are being used. But we go further, and we actually allow you to apply our capability to do DPI, which then tells you which applications are flowing as well. So we can definitively identify the applications, not just through the port numbers. So that's very useful metadata that you can feed into these tools. So the great thing about flow data, in comparison to raw data, is you can save upwards of 100 times the amount of data that you would send just by using the metadata rather than the packets themselves. So that can help us get the cost down. Okay. So Aria will actually go in line, and it actually can tap in literally with physical taps into your network, or it can hang off span ports off of typically your core backbone switches. And we actually have a way to go in line actively. We have a bypass module capability that goes with us, so we become a bump on the wire. And there's different reasons you would do these things. If you want to go in passively and just monitor and pull information into your detection tools and not actually be touching the live data, the taps and the spans are a great way to do that. With Aria, though, and I'll get into this in a minute, if you're saying, I don't want to just defend and find out what's happening in my network, I actually want to be able to have an ability to have instrumentation in the network to go and take action. Once I find a problem, I want to make sure I can stop it. We allow you to do that. So that's what we call an active mode, and that's where we're actually in line. So Aria can be talked to through its APIs to actually go in and stop a given conversation that's going on between a source and destination for a given set of ports or for a given application. And that becomes very, very powerful, because if you think you've got some exfiltration going on, you can start to make sure that we block all of that from transpiring across your network. So it gives you time to actually go in and actually stop it at the source. Or you've got an insider that's gone rogue and trying to steal information. You can isolate that individual from communicating over the network. So they've lost that ability. So it has those degrees of capability. Okay. But getting back to the detection, the nice things of the tools we're talking about, the SIMs, UEBAs, they can be made much more effective if you give them the right data. I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. Okay, so the first example, though, before I jump into a SIM, because a lot of people we talk to are like, I don't have a SIM, even though they are more widely adopted than they were a few years ago, because there's a lot of what we call mid-range SIMs out there from the types of Logarithm and others that have gotten the cost points down so that people can actually afford them, even though they are operationally intense to run. Other people have more simple tools, so and they're just rule-based. So you can have a network IDS or a network IPS. The difference, the IDS is doing pure detection. It's getting usually a copy of the traffic and it's running that copy of traffic through its rules. So it can actually look and say, I can check for malware, I can check for exfiltrations, I can check for data leaks, and actually run through the rules if I get the raw data. And I can do a pretty good job of figuring things out. IDSs, though, have got a problem. They're usually taking in the raw packets. So in order to scale up, you need lots of them. We actually went into a large university and they were putting 100 of these things in and trying to run just a small set of rules on each one of these platforms so that they could cover enough of the traffic with these rules. That's really expensive. And they had a 100 gig backbone too, so that didn't help things. But even then they were saying, well, we just can't run the full set of rules here. We just can't afford to put in that many IDSs. And I said, well, why is that? They said, well, that's because we have to send all the data to every IDS and then let it, only run a certain set of rules against it. And if only we had some way to filter it out and better deal with, looking at what we wanted to look at. So we said, okay, so that's what's needed. So with our packet intelligence, we actually have a way to, when we look at the traffic on the wire, not only can we generate this flow metadata, we can actually go in and classify every single conversation that's going on a 5-tuple basis, which means the source destination pairs, the ports being used, the applications in use. And then we can say the IDS system wants to see all the SAP traffic that's being accessed from these sources, these destinations, I should say, from this subnet with the SAP running. And we can actually go in and say, send all of that to this IDS or to these particular IDSs and fan it out so that we spread the load across a much smaller set of solutions out there. So you can actually read through and look for, hey, that's where all our customer data is, and we don't want any of that leaking out. It can actually run those rules, fairly quickly to go and detect that. So that's a good way to show you an example of getting the right information to the right tools. Now, a network IPS is just the same thing as an IDS. That's why you hear IDS/IPS usually used together. IPS just means a different deployment. It means that you've actually put the IPS in line. You are redirecting traffic to the IPS to have it run through its set of rules before it goes on to its destination. So we allow that as well because we can grab the traffic, and our rule set there is not just take a copy of it, but now we're actually in line and we're redirecting that traffic to a network IPS to run its set of rules. And again, since we're intelligent, we can send the right traffic to the right IPSs so they can only look at certain traffic, maybe let the rest of it go through. Because I only want to look at that IPS or that SAP traffic I used in my example. Everything else can go through to its destination without being slowed down. This has a dramatic impact because now it's a lot more affordable to go in and use these types of tools. And some of these tools out there are free. So you can go to Bro and get a Bro IDS, and that's free code out there that you can run and run these things against that. So it doesn't have to be very, very expensive to run some of these systems. Now, a lot of people do a pretty good job, beyond the freeware with IDS and IPS. And, we integrate with all of them. In fact, I'll talk about it at the end, but we actually can provide you a package that does this probe function, but we also can run the IPS. So we tested this out with a series of them, Fortinets, FortiGate, and Cisco's Firepower IPS. And we take a VM version of that because we can run it in our system, and it runs just fine. It ends up costing, a few tens of thousands of dollars a year, but it makes it a whole lot more affordable than moving up to maybe a full next-gen SIM product line. So there's nice ways now to go in and leverage the network data. Okay. Now a lot of people say, well, wait a minute. Can't SIMs do this already? Why are you, trying to make this work through an IDS or an IPS? I thought SIMs could just do this. I've got a SIM. Can't they do this? But the answer is not very well for network-borne attacks. They do a really good job on pulling information from the log output of your firewalls, from your endpoint systems. So they're pulling in logs, but they're not getting a good visibility of the network because people just don't send them the network packet data. So that's been a problem for SIMs. They tend to be blind there. And then this leads to a lot more false positives because you get indicators, we don't have enough information correlated together. So that's kind of the cool thing about these modern SIMs and UEBAs out there. More and more of them have machine learning. And what that means is they can take a lot more data in and they'll look at the data and look for anomalies after they baselined it and said, oh, this is interesting. And they can now correlate that together from the network, as well as they could correlate it in from the log sources, and then they can see what's happening. So if you could do that cost effectively, that would make the tools work a lot better. But up till now, that just has not been cost effective. As I said, if we were using Splunk here, I looked at it and it said it'd be $500,000 to make that work. And I was like, that's crazy. I can't afford that. So we needed a way to actually get the flow data into Splunk to actually make that work. And that's now taking it from $500,000 if I use Splunk as an example and breaking it down to something that's closer to, $20,000 a year, something that I can afford, as a I would say a mid-range enterprise, and make sure that I'm doing a better job looking for threats, but I can also meet my bottom line requirements with a cost-effective solution. So I pick on Splunk here, but here's a good example of that because a lot of people don't necessarily have Splunk, and what are you talking about? So here's Splunk's actual screen. I'm using one that we have access to, and they call it their security posture screen. So this is their top level dashboard of what's happening, in this environment over this is a given day. So this is actually pulled, from an actual customer. And in this case, you can see a bunch of stuff on top. I think the note is the stuff that's, I got some builds here. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I have a marketing slide here. This guy's getting, in this case, you add these things up across the top, about, if you look at the endpoints, they're sending him 2,000 events. He's got threat intelligence, and that's feeding him 4,000 events. And then he's got maybe another 1,000 of other sources coming in. So he's got about 7,000 events, this day to look through. So imagine trying to go through that. I actually timed it. It would take like 6 guys working pretty much around the clock just to read through and try to understand each event, not even taking any time to take action on it. So that's painful and problematic. But Splunk gives you a way to correlate some of these things together, and then it tries to tell you which are the ones you have to look at. That they say notable events by urgency, but it's still individual events. You want to do is you want to correlate these together so that they'll give you better events that have additional information. And better events mean that they've scoped it better and they've reduced the chance of false positives and giving you enough information, as well as now they've rated it and said, okay, I have enough information that actually helped it come to the top so I can see which ones are at the top of this list are the ones I should focus on. So if we added network data to this, which you can do, suddenly you've added 854 notable network events here, which is not a lot, but now with that ability to correlate that together, you comes in and voila, it's hard to see it over here, but suddenly now I've got 10 events that have been correlated together into real threats, and I can focus in on them because I have enough information. So it makes it a whole lot easier for teams to actually use a product like this and then get to the bottom of things and then focus on the next step, which is, okay, I figured out what it is. Let me figure out the scope of it, do my rest of my analysis, and then figure out how to take action to make it stop. Okay, so it goes from overload to focus. And that's what we're trying to show you. If you provide the right information, especially the network data, it helps quite a bit. So that's where, we talk about Aria packet intelligence. It's providing you that ability to do that. We're talking about flow data, but it also can send the SIM the appropriate packet data too, so that they can ask for, through API, for us to say, okay, you found this, now send me the packet data from every SAP conversation going to this bad destination. so that I can take a closer look at that. So we can do that too, and we can do that via API. So the investigator just clicks to the screen, it talks to us through the workflow, and we present more information that then builds around those events to make that workflow, work better. So it's got that automation that, can be driven by clicks, or can actually be completely automated with some workflows that automatically just query that and pull that information in, so the team has that for faster action. So there's a lot going on here behind the scenes, but the end result is, because of this type of network data, and Forrester did a little study on this, they basically said that pretty much 80% of threats can be detected completely or more thoroughly with the appropriate amount of network data. And why would it be better? Because you're probably picking up threats earlier in the kill chain before they've done harm. You'll see them doing things like lateral spreads, or trying to do reconnaissance to see what ports are open, or doing IP address sweeps, other things like that. Those things can be picked up very quickly before the problems really spread, and all of a sudden all your EDR systems start flashing as all these devices are being compromised. So that's one of the advantages. And other things are just easy to pick up, or can't be picked up by log information. So DDoS attacks, you need network information. You can't pick them up very easily. Brute force attacks, you can kind of pick them up, but you need to do a lot of work off the log information. You can correlate the data you see over the network with what you're coming in, let's say, from your given sources, and you can quickly come to the conclusion this is a brute force, versus somebody who's lost their login, and then you can scope it out pretty quickly as to what's happening. Is it just this device, or is it other devices? So that's ways in which you can think about how to make this work better. Okay. So the second example really is then what we want to do, just to make sure we're clear, is that how do we make this work with a SIM or a UEBA? We can basically send flow metadata up to them as the first step. But as I also indicated, we could also send them individual records. So, looking at a large system, if I'm sending them flow data and select records, price it out using Splunk, this is a 10 gig network, I'm gotten down to about 8K per month. So if you've got a 10 gig backbone, it's cranking along pretty good, and you have a fair amount of threats like we showed in the earlier example, and I also want to get select packet data, we're talking about 8K a month. That's just one data point. It's not very, authoritative, but I'm just trying to give you a flavor for how much this would run. So that's a whole lot more affordable. If I'm just looking at the flow data, it's even cheaper than that, but it's a whole lot more affordable now to deal with this and then make these tools that much more effective. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that. As I mentioned before, the nice thing about a lot of these SIMs, and I'll show you a list of them, a lot of them have enhanced them, or they call modern SIMs, I believe, by Gartner, and label them that. And typically that means they've got things like ML, machine learning, that helps them do a better job of looking at a large amount of data. But they need the data feeds in order to make the ML work, right? So they need the right diet of the right data. So that's what's critical, and that's the gap that we're trying to fill, as I talked at the beginning of the solution. So a little bit of detail here. I don't want to spend too much time, but I have slides here, and if people are interested, we can make sure you get them. This will be recorded. You can get it online as well. But the point here is that this gives you a little bit of detail as to how you go in and do that and provide that type of capability, into their system. So it just recaps about everything I've talked about. Okay, so that's great that you've done a good job at detecting. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about stopping the threats. So that's really the other half of the equation, and this has not been done well in the industry yet. You're seeing an awful lot around new tools that have come out in the last couple of years. They were called SOAR, so it's Security Orchestration Automated Remediation or Response, depending on what you want to call that. So Gartner came up with the words, and it's kind of been recrafted over the last 2 years, but it's only a 2-year-old category. But what's interesting, Splunk bought a company called Phantom that was doing this for like $370 million, and the product was just barely out 6 months in the field. And the reason it was so important to them is that it helps them start to do this. It helps them start to say, we're moving from helping you find things to actually helping you deal with improving your investigative process so you can shorten that up, make it more effective, and then take action. So the nice thing about this is these tools basically clamp onto Splunk and have APIs, and the APIs allow vendors like CSPi to talk to those tools, or have those tools, more importantly, talk back to us. And they can ask us for more data. So they're the ones that can come back in and say, all right, we've detected a threat. Send us that set of conversations from the SAP devices that have the source destination pair. And we can just start pumping that in. And then they can say, that is a threat, stop that conversation. And we can then take action. So we stop that conversation from crossing the network, east-west as well as north-south. So we have that ability then to be that instrumentation that allows action to be taken. So suddenly these tools become a whole lot more effective because it's doing what we talked about earlier. That Cisco was pointing out, it was like 229 days to detect and remediate a problem. You want tools that help you do that in the same day. And this actually gives you a way to get there. And not necessarily in the same day. If you fully automate some of these things, you can actually do it right down to minutes after things have been detected, that you can start taking actions to stop these things. Because you can be surgically precise. You're not saying, stop my SAP servers from communicating to anybody. You're saying, stop it from communicating to this source destination pair. So it's only one conversation that I'm now blocking. So the problem in the past was you were usually doing a blunt force instrument. You were basically unplugging that SAP server so you could figure out what was going on. You don't have to do that because that can be critically hobble your business if you're doing such a thing. Okay, so some details like, well, how do we do this? How do we get into the wire, and what do we do? So CSPi has been known for years for doing what we call packet capture. And we do this really, really well. All the intelligence agencies have standardized on our product to capture everything on the internet and look for the threats coming in from the war on terror. So we've been instrumental working on that for over a decade with those markets. And we've taken and brought this into our product so that we can actually look at packets, capture them, or just view them. Like a window onto the wires I show here is that we're just classifying and identifying the packets as they go, maybe generating flow information, or maybe we're generating additional information that we can send up. So that's why I was talking about the metadata. So I can start to identify these flows and pick off that these are MySQL, my Oracle subnet, FTP traffic, email. Again, because I'm using not only layer 4 information, but already layer 7 information. And I can present this metadata to my tools. And I'm just watching the data as it goes by. I'm not doing anything to it necessarily if I am in line or I'm tapped in. I'm just providing pure analytics without interfering with the production data. So there's no delay added to any of the packets as they transit, even if I am in line. Okay, and then I can start to then apply what we call policies or rules against some of this traffic. So if I'm tapped in, I might say, okay, send this to, just send the MySQL on the destination. I don't care about that. But that Oracle traffic, I want to send a version of this to my, let's say my IDS to run its rules. And you know what, I want to send this to a forensic recorder, you know, because maybe I've had breaches in the past and I've got to keep an eye on stuff for my compliance and auditing. Or I can say, you know, hey, if I am in line, and this is FTP traffic coming out of the subnet, I've got a policy here that says drop this and then send a copy to the IDS. So you're actually in line, and the IDS is going to look at a copy of this so I can figure out what's going on. But it's against my policy for this to be happening in my network. You know, or emails, I can basically redirect the originals to further inspection before they go out. So we can run anti-phish, anti-impersonation. We can do data leak protection on this. So we can do various things now with this type of instrumentation in the network. So how does this go in? So typically I'm just showing you, we can go into the LAN, we can go into the links before they jump into the wide area. So this really can go anywhere. This is software that can be deployed on just about any type of device. If you're typically running up to about a gig. And then once you get to higher speeds, we help keep up with wire rates by providing our additional hardware that makes this assist. So it really helps us handle a lot of this. And I know one of the questions we typically get is, well, wait a minute, some of my traffic's encrypted. How does it deal with that? So the Aria with the hardware version, we have a way to run an encryption, decryption engine. We just need the keys, and then we will decrypt the traffic on the fly and allow us to look at it. So you can start to see, well, we can put this just about anywhere you want, in your data center, maybe on the top of, one of your racks, or at a junction point where things are going to, go to switch or core backbone, and or when it's handed off to come in and out of the cloud, we can start to monitor for these problems. Or we can put the software right out into your public cloud and let's say your EC2 instances, and watch traffic out there. So you do have to watch that, because Amazon doesn't give you that capability for free, and this is a fairly intense application. So a lot of people say, well, I'd rather put it back at the junction of my premises so I don't get charged an arm and a leg from Amazon. All right, but then we can get the data I show over here, shooting over to in my Splunk example, giving them the right type of data. All right, so what type of threats does this help detect, and what was Forrester talking about? So here's the list of threats that have gone through that getting network data is critical for, or network data is critical for because it tells you sooner in the kill chain that these threats are appearing, or helps confirm that these threats are appearing and give you enough information to scope the threat. So it's not just this device, it's all these devices. This is patient zero, but we're seeing him try to spread to these other devices. So here's the scope of the problem. You've got to go take advantage of this type of data to go figure out what you do next. Otherwise, you'll think you got it, and then you've got 5 more right on the heels of it, of devices that have been, let's say, infected with some form of ransomware, and you're just chasing after it instead of getting ahead of it. Okay, so I also mentioned SIMs, so just to be fair here, I listed a group of SIMs that we've gone through and make sure our solution works with. It's not saying it's an exhaustive list, I just kind of ran out of space and didn't want to put too many on here. So these SIMs are all on the left side, all have the ability to take in the flow metadata that we can provide automatically. And then I show you the ones that also can take in packet ingest. Not all of them can, but it shows you, 5, including Splunk, IBM Curator, Logarithm that I talked about earlier. You do see an awful lot in the mid-market, even Alien Vault and RSA's NetWitness. So you're covering probably 80% of SIM deployments on this list right here. And then the other side shows you the ones that have added at least scripts or APIs that I talked about, so that they can have automatic workflows, so we can integrate with those. It shows you the list here. Some of these things are still, in development, but most of them you can see have come a long way over a short period of time to open up their systems to allow us to actually plug in and take action. So you can go from enhanced detection with just flows coming in. If we can send the packets, now you can give them focused investigation capability. And this could be IDS and IPS. I could show that, but I don't have time. And then you have the push button remediation that the APIs give you to allow someone to take action, or you can completely automate it in some cases. So it takes automatic action without a human intervention. So that's showing you that. And then there's orchestration tools. And so here's a series that I just grabbed 5 that have the ability to allow for simple API integration into their workflows. So we've worked already to make sure, Splunk and Phantom, we've checked that out, Swim Lane, and we're looking at these others, but just looking at the documentation, we can tell that these things allow us to come out and say that these can be integrated with our system. And just an example, I've only looked at 5. There's probably another 20 of these things out there, but these are the 5 that probably are getting a lot of traction in the market. All right, so we talked a little bit about the solution, but I want to make sure I cover, what is Aria, and how does it roll out? What does it look like if I'm interested in this? So the last bullet here is the packet intelligence application that we've been talking about. I talk more about the application, but as I said, there's these applications now that can be seeded out across your entire environment. You might have tens of these things out there. How do you deploy them? How do you make it actually easy to manage them? How do you make sure that they're securely deployed? So that's where the Aria SDS platform comes in. So we actually have a patented architecture that's been built around allowing us to roll these applications out, and as they become active, you deployed it on this server, or they're deployed on this NIC card that we provide that goes inside servers, or they're on one of our probe platforms or appliances. once they come active, they start to radiate out, they beacon out, and then an orchestrator will actually find them and then set them up, deploy the appropriate instance once that's secured and hardened. We then have encrypted communication going on, and then deploying the applications, and then going one step forward and fully configuring and provisioning them if they've been so set up. So if you do one once and you then roll out 10 more of these applications, they just configure themselves automatically. There's no more work to be done. It's called zero-touch provisioning. So it's that type of capability built into this system. Okay, so like I said, I won't talk about this slide, but a lot has gone into the patenting of around how do you actually roll out very secure applications like I've just talked about in a way that you can be sure someone can't get a hold of and or penetrate through. So this is very, very hardened, as well as leveraging the zero-touch capabilities. So we have actually 2 patents that have gone through along these processes. And these are things we learn along the way, mostly from the military and other types of non-cybersecurity related applications, and actually, taking that learning and figured out how to put it into the way our products are rolled out and operated. So I talked about software, but we also mentioned hardware. So like I said, you might want hardware because you need to do certain things and you need to make sure you're not slowing things down. So we actually have multiple instances of hardware. So one of our specialties, as I mentioned before, we fight the war on terror. We're in all the intelligence agencies. We've literally deployed like 10,000 of our intelligent network adapters. What those are is really intelligent NIC cards that go into these servers that these agencies are running, and they're saying, send me everything from the entire internet, and then this card needs to capture everything coming in there at line rate, run its filters, and then load balance into the host so that they can keep up with typically 10 gig, so they can maximize that server's capacity to run its series of detection algorithms, which are specialized for the intelligence agencies, not the same thing. But you can turn it around and say, well, that's the same thing I can do with Bro. So in fact, the Bro community has come in and said, there's one intelligent adapter card that we recommend, and that is the Miracom card from CSPi. Because it makes our Bro solutions go from about 1 gig of capacity to about 10 gig if you use this. So it's a huge win, and that's using our existing cards. I'm showing you here the next generation of these. So this has a lot more intelligence on it, so we can do that fuller suite of flow generation, advanced classification, advanced rule sets. So we can literally deploy thousands of rules if you want, running inside one of these cards, which is pretty cool because you never know what people are going to want to do with these things, and they want to stay up and run at line rate. So some of the things is, you talk about rules, so we could run data leak protection, and we'll actually have an application coming out that'll actually run on this thing. It's our own, and it can stay at line rate and just look for a small set of information. So you can detect your typical PII, name, address, social security number, the typical identifying information. The same with PHI, so that these things could run in line rate, and they could be put into the critical servers. And not only could they see things before they left the server, but they can also look at things going between VMs, let's say on that device. Okay, so it gives you that capability, or you say, wait a minute, I got my own servers, I don't want yours down below. I can now put this thing in, and it's more cost effective. Others are saying, I don't want a card, I want an appliance, something easy I can deploy in my environment, and we provide those as well. All right, so the net of it is really, the endpoint here is, when I put this solution together, what we really got here, kind of summarizing things here, is that we've got what we call military-grade security operations here. We've taken what we learned from military deployments and fighting the war on terror and said, what do we need to do as far as set of capabilities to allow you to have a way to do this automated recon across your entire network and fill that network gap. And using our military, we leave no threat behind this way because you actually now have the ability to look at every single packet that goes through your network, north, south, east, west. And now allows you to detect and stop threats that are in motion much earlier in the kill chain than when they land on systems. And not just when they're going through to and from the internet, the way the firewall can typically do today. So makes it much more cost effective as well, because the solutions I'm showing you here don't cost an awful lot of money. Typically, you do business cases for people, and they can see the advantage of putting these things in because they're costing tens of thousands of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars in your typical medium-sized environments. And of course, it's going to enhance your SOC, no matter what your capabilities. If you got two guys doing it, it works great. No SOC, no problem. We can actually integrate in the IPS into our appliances that I showed before, so that we'll pull in all the information, we'll run it against our rule set, and then we'll put it into an IPS. And again, it can be a very, very cost-effective solution. And for people that don't want to use this for security, it gives you a visibility infrastructure on its own. So it allows you to see what's happening in your environment and be able to visualize that. And we have a set of tools that we provide and have integrated with third-party tools to let you do that. So you can do just about anything you want with this type of instrumentation once you have it to solve your particular needs. Okay, so the other point about it is it's not just about detection, it's about speeding up your investigative response. So you want to make sure you're not missing any threat surfaces here, and that's been a big problem. And you want to make sure you can actually get ahead of and stop network-borne threats sooner rather than days or even weeks later, because that's usually when the damage has already been done. All right, so you want to be able to have that ability to do it sooner. And then the last thing is you want to make sure that it's as fully automated as possible so that you can start to take humans out of the equation, or you have them minimally involved in the equation. The tools are doing all the work, and you just have to make a decision and push a button to take action. Okay, so that's the conversation. What do we have for Q&A?